All right, first thing I just want to talk about is operating budgets, which is very timely, right? Who has a calendar fiscal year, January through December? Show of hands. A majority, that's probably the most common fiscal year time period for an association. So you're probably right now in the middle of approving it or just having had it approved, right? So I'm just going to start with the most basic of basics. What is an operating budget? So an operating budget just establishes your annual expenses, right? Your utilities that come in, and that then fixes your assessment. So it's one thing I want everyone to understand is the word assessment, because I think there's a stigma that comes with the word assessment. They think of special assessment. But actually your dues, that's the word we all like to use, right? Your dues is an assessment. So when you're as a board, when you fix the annual budget, you are fixing the annual assessment for every homeowner. And that assessment, then you get to decide, do you pay it monthly, do you pay it quarterly, do you pay it once a year, whatever. But it is an assessment, and that becomes important, and we'll talk a little bit in a minute why. Our practice at Sharpers, we do like to, what I like to call zero-based budget. It's actually not the technical definition of zero-based budget, but I like to say it as this. As a manager, we are trained when we are providing and proposing a budget to you, is we look at all of your expenses and what you need. Here's what you need for your association. Whether it's a contract, whether it's a trend on utilities, whatever. Here's what you need, and that tells me what to fix your assessment at, right? I like to refer to that as zero-based budgeting because it's very simple. Here's our expenses, so this is what we need to meet it, right? So, and again, another 101, typically it's a 12-month year for your fiscal year, right? So your budget really is a tool, right? It should be your guide to help you make decisions on what you can and can't spend. So it's your planning for your community activities, it controls the community's financial operations, provides continuity of services, it minimizes the unexpected expenditures, and it establishes, again, the annual assessment, right? That's your budget, it's a tool. So it should be broken up into two different categories, right? So your revenue, the most prominent one obviously is the dues, the assessment, right? But some also like to budget for interest. You know, if they carry a large balance, maybe they want to accommodate and account for the interest. Maybe fines, if you have fines, if you like to be fining people all the time, you can allocate a budget line item for that. Fees, like move in, move out, that might be another revenue stream. Legal, but this one really is offset by the expense typically, right? That's usually like a collection issue, so you're paying for it up front, but you collect it on the back end. But you might see legal revenue, and that's what that is. And others might be if you've got rent, if you rent something out, if you've got a commercial space, maybe you've got a community room, Kingsley Heights, right? Which you guys have a conference room, a community room. Antennas, satellites, some like condo buildings, a lot of people were starting to pay a lot of money, like T-Mobile or whatever, to use your space on the top. That might be another revenue stream. One thing when you're budgeting, I don't like to account for any of those, by the way. I would always rather be pleasantly surprised that we're getting this additional revenue and it helped us than plan for, 20 people are going to move in and move out, so we're going to account for $5,000 and all of a sudden only $5,000 and we budgeted that expense, right? So my personal philosophy on budgeting is be careful of those other things outside of the assessment, right? That should be your primary. So on the other side, your expenses, some of the common categories, right? Utilities, whatever you're responsible for, whatever the governing documents say, you're responsible for. Maybe it's garbage, maybe it's water, electricity for the common areas. Contracted services, right? Grounds maintenance, lawn, snow, landscaping, those types of things. HVAC, cleaning. Maintenance. Now this is the one where we get in trouble a little bit, right? Because that is kind of a crapshoot, quite frankly, right? We don't know we don't know if we need a lot, if we need a little. So you kind of have to go off of trends. Personnel, staff, professional administrative, so Sharper management, right? Your audit, your taxes. Insurance, we just spent a lot of time talking about that one, right? So I guess I should move that one to the top and bold it and underline it and italicize it, right? It just keeps getting more. And then your replacement reserves, which we're going to talk about tonight. Those are the typical categories of expenses, right? So one of the three things I like to think about when I'm thinking about the expenses of a budget is to kind of categorize them. What's our obligation? What expense items is an obligation? What do our governing documents tell us that we have to be funding for, right? So maybe it's utilities again, maybe it's governance or any kind of government type contracts, insurance, maintenance, and reserves, right? Those are typically the obligations. What are the needs? So this is where it becomes a little more subjective, right? Like, do we need to redo the landscaping? Do we need to paint all the front doors? Right, that's where you have some dialogue as a board and you have to come to an agreement on what the needs are. And then you have to manage the expectations, right? How do you manage the expectations of the homeowner? So those are the things you need to be thinking about as you're budgeting. So I like to break those down, pare it down into even more simple things into two categories. Your mandatory and your discretionary, right? That's how you should be thinking about your expenses. And particularly right now in this economic climate, right? What do we have to be funding? And my guess is a lot of you are probably sitting here right now looking at your budget, you're going through that process, and how can we mitigate the dues increase that we need? Because everything is going up, right? So how do we mitigate that? So now you're having to take a hard look at your discretionary items. So I would really encourage you to go through, when you look at your budget, look at it in one of those two lenses. And if you really have to start making some hard decisions, look at that latter, the discretionary ones.